The Australian Commandos stepped off the Hercules into Brunei's wet heat like they were walking into a sauna filled with mosquitoes. Captain Ryan Dingo McCarthy led his six-man team down the ramp at Anduki Airfield, their newly issued jungle kit still crisp, their confidence absolute. They were elite operators who'd proven themselves in the Middle East's unforgiving deserts and Afghanistan's brutal mountains. What they didn't know was that the jungle was about to humble them in ways no enemy ever had. The British SAS instructors waited in the shade, looking almost casual in faded greens that seemed to have merged with the vegetation itself. Warrant Officer First Class Simon Moth Henshaw had been teaching at the Brunei Jungle Warfare School for 3 years. Before that, he'd spent over a decade operating in jungles from South America to Southeast Asia. The lines on his face weren't from age. They were from squinting through triple canopy rainforest for 76 years of collective SAS experience, compressed into 4 instructors. "Welcome to the real green hell, gentlemen," Moth said, his voice quiet enough that the Australians had to lean in. "Forget everything you think you know about fieldcraft. The jungle has its own rules." McCarthy bristled slightly. His team had just completed a grueling mission cycle. They were fit, sharp, and highly trained. 6 weeks seemed excessive for what was essentially advanced camping. Day 1 proved him catastrophically wrong. The first patrol lasted 4 hours, just 4 hours of movement through primary rainforest covering barely 3 kilometers. The Australians emerged looking like they'd fought a war. Uniforms soaked through, faces covered in scratches from wait-a-while vines. One man nursing a close call with a snake he'd almost grabbed as a handhold. The SAS instructors had barely broken a sweat. "In the desert, you can see your enemy at 1,000 meters, Moth explained that evening, as the commandos treated their various injuries. "In the jungle, you're lucky to see 3 meters. Everything changes. Your spacing, your speed, your entire tactical mindset. The jungle doesn't care about your CV. Private Jack Kimura, the team's tracker and indigenous Australian with bush skills that had impressed every instructor he'd met, spoke up. "I grew up in the bush, tracked feral pigs through scrub that'd tear your skin off. How different can it be?" Moth smiled, not unkindly. "Show me tomorrow. Take point on the patrol." The next morning, Kimura led them into the secondary jungle near the Temburong River. His confidence lasted exactly 40 minutes before he admitted he was lost. The jungle's density created a claustrophobia that scrambled mental maps. Every direction looked identical. The canopy blocked the sun, making navigation by natural indicators nearly impossible. Staff Sergeant Torch Williams, a SAS veteran with gray threading his temples, materialized beside them like a ghost. They hadn't heard him approach despite being on full alert. "You're navigating like the land is your enemy," Torch said to Kimura. "In the jungle, the land is neutral. You have to become part of it, not fight through it. Watch." He moved forward with a fluid economy of motion that seemed impossible given the terrain's density. Where the Australians pushed through vegetation, Torch flowed around it. Where they stepped heavily, testing ground before committing weight, he seemed to know instinctively where solid footing lay. Within minutes, he'd moved them back onto their planned route, using techniques that seemed more art than science. 76 years of experience," McCarthy muttered to his second-in-command. "Against our 6 weeks of training, maybe we should shut up and learn." Week 2 focused on survival. The commandos learned that in the jungle, everything either bit, stung, poisoned, or infected you. Corporal Emma Crash Davidson developed a skin infection from a tiny scratch that became a suppurating wound within hours. The humidity made every cut a potential medical emergency. The SAS instructors taught them to move their observation posts 3 times daily, not for security against enemy forces, but because the insects would find them otherwise. They learned to sleep sitting up, weapons across their knees, because lying down in the wrong spot could mean waking up covered in leeches, or worse. "The jungle is a living thing," explained Sergeant Gibbo Gibson, whose Geordie accent had somehow survived decades in the tropics. "It tests you every second. The moment you relax, it'll kill you. Not dramatically, just a little infection here, a parasite there, dehydration from sweating liters you didn't know you lost, death by 1,000 tiny cuts." The Australians began to understand. This wasn't about physical fitness or tactical prowess. It was about developing an entirely new operational philosophy. Week 3 brought tracking exercises. The SAS instructors could read the jungle floor like the Australians read printed text. A bent leaf here, disturbed moss there, the direction of a broken spider web. Each tiny detail told a story about who had passed and when. In the desert, tracks last for days, Moth explained, kneeling beside what looked to the Australians like completely undisturbed ground. Here, the jungle erases them in hours. You learn to see what was, not what is. He pointed to disturbances the Australians couldn't even see until he traced them with a stick, a boot print so faint it was nearly invisible. Vegetation crushed at an angle indicating movement direction. Water droplets on leaves that shouldn't be there given the ambient humidity. Kimura, watching intently, finally understood the difference between bush tracking and jungle craft. It's not about following obvious signs, it's about seeing the pattern breaks. Now you're learning, Torch said with approval. By week 4, the Australians had stopped trying to impose their will on the environment. McCarthy noticed the change in his team's movement. They no longer crashed through undergrowth but found the natural gaps. They stopped fighting the terrain and started working with it. Their noise discipline improved exponentially because they'd learned which leaves were silent underfoot and which would crackle like gunfire. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was philosophical. Back home, we plan operations around our capabilities, McCarthy admitted during an evening debrief with Moth. We identify the objective, plan the approach, execute with overwhelming skill and firepower. Here, the jungle dictates everything. Our capabilities mean nothing if the environment doesn't allow them. That's why jungle operations are the purest form of special operations, Moth replied. Strip away all your technology, your support, your comfort zones. What's left is raw fieldcraft and mental resilience. The SAS learned this the hard way in Malaya, in Borneo, in Brunei itself during the confrontation. 76 years of institutional knowledge passed from one generation to the next, refined through actual operations. Week 5 introduced tactical operations. The lessons crystallized. The Australians planned a raid on a simulated enemy camp, using all their newfound jungle skills. They moved silently through terrain that would have defeated them 5 weeks earlier. They navigated by micro-terrain features, maintained perfect spacing despite near-zero visibility, and established observation posts that the SAS instructors admitted were impressively concealed. But Moth's team, playing the enemy, detected them anyway. You moved well, Moth explained afterward. Your fieldcraft was excellent. But you still think like desert operators. You planned a direct approach because that's what works in open terrain. In the jungle, you spiral in. You take 3 times as long but arrive from an unexpected direction. Patience trumps speed every time. The final week brought it all together. A 6-day exercise deep in the Ulu Temburong National Park, living entirely off the land, moving between objectives while being hunted by SAS instructors who knew every inch of the terrain. The Australians didn't win, but they survived, completed their objectives, and most importantly, they learned. On the final day, as they hiked back to base, McCarthy found himself moving through the jungle with a confidence that came from respect rather than arrogance. His team had shed their preconceptions and absorbed lessons that couldn't be taught in any other environment. What's the difference between a good Special Forces operator and a great one? He asked Moth as they reached the airfield. A good operator masters techniques, Moth replied. A great operator masters adaptation. Your team arrived as good operators who were excellent in specific environments. You're leaving as operators who understand that every environment demands humility and the willingness to become a student again. That evening, over the traditional Corsan beers, the Australians and British traded stories. The competitive edge that had defined the first weeks had transformed into mutual respect. The Commandos had learned that elite status wasn't a destination, but a constant journey of adaptation and learning. Same time next year? McCarthy asked. We'll bring a different team, start building our own institutional knowledge. Already on the calendar. Moth confirmed. And maybe we'll send some of our lads to train with you in the desert. Even old dogs can learn new tricks. Kimura laughed. Bring your sunscreen. That environment will humble you just as fast. As the Hercules lifted off the next morning, carrying the Australians back to their world of sand and rock, McCarthy looked down at the endless green canopy below. 6 weeks ago, he'd have called it just another training environment. Now he understood it was a teacher that had reshaped not just his skills, but his entire operational philosophy. The jungle had won, and in losing, they'd gained something far more valuable than victory. They'd gained wisdom that would make them better operators in every environment they'd face for the rest of their careers. Sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when to be a student.